By 2036, the triple lock system, which guarantees state pension rises each year, could actually bankrupt the state pension itself. Now, the UK already spends £137 billion a year on the state pension, and that's more than it spends on defence and education combined, and yet the system still doesn't work. Now, the maximum single-tier state pension is just short of £12,000 a year. Now, that's assuming, of course, they've got an impeccable national insurance track record of 35 qualifying years. And that's barely half the national minimum wage and about a third of the average wage in the UK of £37,000 a year. That makes our state pension one of the lowest in Europe. Now, in Spain or Italy, for example, their state pension replaces about 70% of their average wage. Now, meanwhile, those in the UK who were born in the early 1990s are being told that they might have to work well into their 70s. Now, we're paying for a pension promise that's crumbling and for a state pension that now seems to be at least failing in slow motion. So in this week's video, we're going to look at the state pension and how it isn't sustainable anymore because it's costing the UK more than there are people to pay into it. So what happens when it breaks down and what happens to those people who need it most? If this is your first time to the channel, a very warm welcome. Hi, my name's Simon and I'm a chartered financial planner with decades of experience helping hundreds of clients as well as their families plan ahead with confidence by keeping more of what they've earned. Now, with all our state pension videos, it's important to explain that under the Social Security Contributions Act of 1992, the state pension is a contributory benefit, and despite what we may feel, it's not a right. So despite paying into the system for all of our working lifetimes, the goalposts can and do change. Now, as with any state benefit, the eligibility criteria can change, such as the state pension age increasing, how the state pension income increases and rises each year, how many qualifying years you need to get the state pension, and what happens to it when you die. Now, the Adam Smith Institute has recently updated its dynamic model, and they've warned that by 2036, the UK's state pension could become financially unsustainable. Now, that means that the annual state pension payouts would exceed the national insurance contributions paying for it. Now, even after the recent national insurance tax rises on employers, their model suggests that the triple lock will accelerate state pension costs and is going to force the Treasury to draw down their reserves in the National Insurance Investment Account, and that could ultimately deplete them in total by 2040. Now, this is essentially the reserve fund for the national insurance system, and it's the pot that temporarily holds our surplus national insurance contributions before they're used to pay out for things like state pensions, unemployment benefits, and of course, the sick pay. Now, in plain English, if the government keeps the triple lock, their own watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility, says that the state pension is going to climb to about 7.7% of GDP, which clearly is unsustainable. And that's because the triple lock is going to rise by the highest of inflation, measured by CPI, average wages, or 2.5%. And that format is set to cost more than 3 times what it was originally projected to cost. And let's just remind ourselves that there are actually 2 state pensions. The basic rate state pension is a flat rate payment based on your national insurance contributions record, typically requiring 30 qualifying years of national insurance, and the full amount is £9,174 a year. Now, on top of that, many people had the ability to build up extra income through the state second pension or SERPs, and both of those were earnings related. Now, in April 2016, the government replaced this with a new single-tier state pension, and that was supposed to simplify the system, typically requiring 35 qualifying years of national insurance to get the full amount. And if you do qualify for the maximum state pension, that's going to be £11,973 a year, and that's going to be increasing by 4.7% in April next year to £12,535 for the year. And it's always worthwhile remembering that if you did contract out of SERPs, either voluntarily or via your employer's pension scheme, you might not get the maximum state pension. And I'm going to link the reasons why in a video at the end of this video. Now, both these state pensions are increased by the triple lock each year, and that protects today's pensioners against the nasty cost of living rises. Now, average earnings in May 2025 were £37,544 a year, and the national minimum living wage was £23,492 a year, and that's based on a 37-hour working week. And that means that the state pension sits well below both of these benchmarks, and it offers vital context for anyone that assumes that the state pension alone is going to deliver a comfortable and a dignified retirement. And to put that into perspective, that means that the state pension is just 32% of the average wage in the UK and 50% of the national minimum living wage. Just let that sink in for a minute. Now, even though the current state pension is financially unsustainable, the UK does spend less than our European neighbours. Now, the OECD states that public spending on our state pension is roughly 5% of GDP at the moment. And that is noticeably less than many of other countries, both in Europe and the developed world. But just because we spend less on our state pension, that doesn't mean it's affordable forever, because affordability is going to depend on the path of spending relative to a growing economy. Now, you can see from this chart on screen from the OECD report that I mentioned earlier, that the state pension in the UK replaces about 55% of previous earnings. But you can also see from this breakdown that the state pension covers the majority of income required in retirement for most of Europeans, and that is in the green bars. Now, whereas in the UK, that green bar is around the 50% level, any shortfalls got to be made up by our workplace and our personal pensions, as well as our savings and our investments. So whilst in some countries, they're spending about 12% of GDP on their state pension, more than twice we are in the UK, this does show what is possible where there's political will. But naturally, there's going to be a trade-off. Those higher pensions abroad come with either higher taxes or later retirement ages. So if you want a more generous state pension, someone's got to have to pay more or to work longer to make that happen. Now, the UK basic state pension spend is much smaller, but the UK also relies on us taking more responsibility for our own financial future to do some of the heavy lifting for us. And that's fabulous if you have got extra pension or savings or investments, but it's very grim if you don't. So if you're finding value in this video about how the state pension could be fading in real time, but in slow motion, then hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and join this growing community. It's free. I assure you the button will not bite, and you can also hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss any of this future content. But before we move on, here's a couple of questions for you. Would you be willing to pay more national insurance to get a higher state pension? Or would you prefer the choice to retire earlier and take a lower state pension? Let me know in the comments. You might have already heard the headline that people born in the 1990s may not get their state pension until in their 70s. Now, some commentary is going to peg a state pension age of 74 by the 2060s if ministers try to hold the triple lock in place and they don't try to stabilise their costs. Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies doesn't make pension policy, but its recent review is very clear. If the government doesn't set realistic rules for how pensions rise in retirement, and importantly, who qualifies, we're going to end up promising more to future generations that we can actually afford to pay. So in simple terms, somebody's going to have to give, and that probably means rising the state pension age yet again. Now, if you look around Europe, you can see where this is going. Now, Denmark's going to increase its state pension age to 70 by 2040 by tying their retirement ages to their life expectancy. And Germany's also debating about pushing their state pension age out towards 70 as well. Now, in the UK, our official state pension age is 66. That's going to be rising to age 67 by 2028. And there's also a review in place with the next rise to age 68. So the message for anyone of the younger generation is becoming absolutely crystal clear. You might need to realise that you might not see any other state pension that you've been promised, despite paying into it and contributing into it with your national insurance contributions. Now, over the last 5 years, the triple lock has delivered pension rises faster than average inflation and earnings. And that's offered pensioners valuable protection, and it's rightly won applause from all sectors in society. But it also exposes a structural flaw, that by tying the triple lock to the highest of these three volatile options, it has a ratchet effect that only goes one way. Now, the Adam Smith Institute takes the argument to a tough but logical conclusion that by 2036, the state pension could be financially unsustainable in its current format. And that means it's going to cost more to pay out the state pension than the government collects in national insurance, even after the recent tax increases on employers and their national insurance. So something clear has got to change, whether it's the triple lock, whether it's how much we pay in national insurance contributions, who qualifies for the state pension, and will that be via means testing the state pension? Are we going to have later retirement ages or higher taxes to cover the shortfall? Now, I can't think of any extra options. Can you? Let me know in the comments. Well, first thing you need to do is get your state pension forecast and make up for any gaps in your national insurance record. You need to max out your workplace pension or your private pensions as well. Now, don't forget, about 80% of the self-employed have got no pension savings at all. So if you are self-employed, just get started. You also need to make sure you're going to have retirement income from multiple sources in case the state pension format does change in the future. You also need to plan for a later retirement age, and you need to make sure you've got enough savings and investments to cover your lifestyle spending until the state pension actually starts to pay out. But you also need to keep up to date with political changes or subscribe to this channel, and I promise you I'm going to keep you updated as we move forward. Now, pension reform is coming, either sooner but with intent, or later, quickly and in a panic. So I've linked two other videos in this series about, despite having 35 years national insurance, you still might not get the maximum state pension, and of course, how to avoid any regrets when taking your 25% tax-free cash from your pension. Thank you for watching to the very end, and for your time and for your patience as always. I'm going to see you all again next week.